The words escaped Amanda Clark's lips, with the careful precision of someone who had learned that speaking the truth could be dangerous, that sharing her story might put her children at risk, that even now, 3 years later, she still looked over her shoulder every time she left the house. Steve Harvey stood transfixed at his podium, staring at this 31-year-old woman, whose calm demeanor couldn't hide the vigilance in her eyes, the way she instinctively positioned herself where she could see all the exits, the protective way she kept glancing toward her 3 children. "I changed my identity to survive with my children," Amanda had said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of someone who had made the ultimate sacrifice for safety. "We don't exist as the people we used to be. We had to disappear completely to stay alive. And every day I wonder if it was enough, if we're really safe, if he'll ever stop looking for us." The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable pause between game show questions. It was the heavy, frightened quiet that settles when everyone in a room suddenly understands they're witnessing something that transcends entertainment, something that forces them to confront the hidden reality that millions of women live with every day. The terror of loving someone who wants to destroy them. Steve looked at Amanda, sitting in the front row, with her 3 children, 10-year-old Sophie, 8-year-old Jake, and 6-year-old Emma, and saw something that broke every rule of game show hosting. This wasn't about Family Feud anymore. This was about a mother who had given up everything, including her own identity, to save her children from a man who was supposed to protect them. About courage that looked like running away, about love that required becoming someone else entirely. Let me take you back to how we arrived at this moment. How what started as a routine Family Feud taping became a masterclass in survival, the price of safety, and what it means to disappear from your own life, to save the lives of those you love most. It was a gray December morning at the Steve Harvey Studios in Atlanta, the kind of winter day that makes everything feel uncertain and fragile. But sitting in the front row was a family whose presence represented something much more complex than seasonal melancholy. They embodied the reality that safety is not a given, that home can be the most dangerous place, and that sometimes love requires the ultimate sacrifice of identity itself. Amanda Clark, though that wasn't the name she had been born with, sat with her 3 children, her eyes constantly scanning the studio, her body language suggesting someone who had learned to assess every situation for potential threats. At 31, Amanda carried herself with the hypervigilance of someone who had survived something that should have killed her, whose very existence was a testament to the power of maternal protection. The children beside her were beautiful, well-behaved, and clearly loved, but there was something in their quietness, their careful attention to their mother's moods, that suggested they too had learned lessons. No children should have to learn about staying safe, staying quiet, staying invisible when necessary. Amanda's journey to this studio had begun 4 years earlier. Though the seeds of her escape had been planted much earlier than that, she had married David Mitchell when she was 22, pregnant with Sophie, and desperate to believe that the man who claimed to love her could change, could stop drinking, could control the anger that turned him into someone she didn't recognize. The early years of marriage had been a cycle of violence and apology, of broken promises and renewed hope, of Amanda learning to walk on eggshells around a man whose moods could shift from loving to lethal without warning. She had stayed because she was young, because she believed his promises to change, because she thought she could fix him, because she was isolated from family and friends who might have helped her see the truth. The violence had escalated with each pregnancy. David's control had tightened around Amanda like a noose, cutting off her access to money, to transportation, to communication with the outside world. He monitored her phone calls, controlled their finances, and made it clear that any attempt to leave would result in consequences that extended beyond Amanda herself to the children they both claimed to love. The final breaking point had come on a night when David, drunk and enraged about something at work, had turned his violence toward 7-year-old Sophie for the crime of spilling juice on his newspaper. Amanda had watched her husband grab their daughter with the same hands that had hit her countless times, and in that moment, she had made the decision that would save their lives. They were leaving, no matter what it cost. But leaving an abusive relationship isn't as simple as walking out the door, especially when children are involved. David had made it clear that he would never let Amanda take his children, that he would hunt them down wherever they went, that he had the resources and connections to find them anywhere they tried to hide. So Amanda had done something that required more courage than staying ever had. She had planned their disappearance with the help of an underground network that specialized in helping domestic violence victims escape situations where conventional legal protections weren't enough. The process had taken 6 months of secret planning. Amanda had slowly gathered important documents, had opened a secret bank account, had worked with advocates to create new identities for herself and her children. She had learned about safe houses, about how to change your appearance, about how to live without leaving digital footprints that could be traced. On a Tuesday morning in March, while David was at work, Amanda had loaded her children into a car, driven by a volunteer she had never met before and would never see again. They had driven for 12 hours to a safe house in another state, where Amanda had legally changed their names, dyed their hair, and begun the process of building entirely new lives. The children had been told they were playing a game, that they had to pretend to be different people for a while, that their old names were secrets they couldn't share with anyone. Sophie, Jake, and Emma had adapted with the resilience that children possess, accepting their new identities as part of a grand adventure, rather than understanding the life or death necessity behind their transformation. For 3 years, Amanda and her children had lived in a kind of witness protection program of their own creation. Amanda worked as a waitress under her new name, paid rent in cash, kept her children in different schools than they would have attended under their old identities. They lived quietly, carefully, always aware that their safety depended on remaining invisible. The Family Feud opportunity had come through the domestic violence shelter, where Amanda volunteered on weekends, helping other women plan their own escapes. The shelter had been selected for a special Community Heroes episode, and Amanda had been nominated because of her work, helping other survivors navigate the complex process of disappearing from dangerous relationships. Amanda had been terrified to appear on television, worried that even with their changed appearances and names, David might recognize them. But the shelter advocates had convinced her that sharing her story could help other women understand that escape was possible, that there were resources available, that they didn't have to die to get away from their abusers. During the pre-show meet and greet, when Steve approached Amanda and her children, he immediately noticed something different about their family dynamic. While other families seemed excited about being on television, Amanda was focused entirely on keeping her children close, on monitoring their surroundings, on maintaining the kind of control that spoke of someone who had learned that vigilance was the price of safety. "Amanda," Steve had said, noting the way she positioned herself protectively near her children, "you and your kids seem very close." "We have to be," Amanda had replied, and something in her tone suggested layers of meaning that Steve couldn't quite grasp. "We only have each other." Steve had sensed there was more to Amanda's story, but the conversation had been brief, interrupted by production needs. The Clark family had been selected to compete against the Rodriguez family from Texas, with Amanda joined by her 3 children and 2 volunteers from the domestic violence shelter who had become like family to them. From the moment the game started, it was clear that Amanda was intelligent, quick-thinking, and deeply protective of her children. Steve was impressed by Amanda's composure and her children's obvious devotion to their mother, but he found himself repeatedly drawn to the way Amanda seemed constantly alert, as if she was monitoring something beyond the game show that required her attention. The game progressed through 4 rounds with both families playing well. Amanda's answers were thoughtful and strategic, and her children cheered appropriately. But there was something in their careful behavior that suggested a family that had learned to be perfect in public, to never draw unwanted attention. It was during the 5th round that everything changed. The survey questions seemed routine enough. Name something people sometimes have to give up to start over. Amanda had just given a response that earned points. Their past. As the family celebrated, Steve decided to engage more personally with Amanda about fresh starts and new beginnings. "That's a great answer, Amanda," Steve said. "Starting over can be really hard, but also liberating. Have you ever had to start over in your own life?" The question was meant to be encouraging, relatable, the kind of interaction that celebrated resilience and personal growth. But when Amanda looked at Steve, her expression wasn't that of someone preparing to share an inspiring story about overcoming challenges. "Mr. Harvey," Amanda said, her voice clear but carrying a tremor that made the studio begin to quiet. "Can I be completely honest with you about what starting over really means?" Steve nodded, sensing that whatever Amanda wanted to share was important. 3 years ago, I had to make a choice between staying in my life and staying alive, Amanda said, her careful words making it clear she had thought about this conversation many times. My husband was abusing me and starting to turn his violence toward our children. The legal system couldn't protect us because he was smart about his abuse, careful to never leave evidence that would hold up in court. The studio began to fall silent as people sensed that something profound and frightening was being shared. So I did something that required more courage than I knew I had. Amanda continued, her voice growing stronger, despite the weight of what she was revealing. I changed my identity to survive with my children. We don't exist as the people we used to be. Amanda Clark isn't the name I was born with. Sophie, Jake, and Emma aren't the names on their birth certificates. Steve felt something cold settle in his chest, a recognition that this conversation had moved far beyond entertainment into territory that was genuinely dangerous, genuinely life-threatening. Amanda, Steve said, his voice gentler now, filled with concern, are you telling me that you and your children are living under assumed identities? Amanda nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes, but her voice remaining steady. We had to disappear completely to stay alive. I worked with advocates who specialize in helping domestic violence victims escape situations where restraining orders and legal protections aren't enough. We changed our names, our appearances, our entire lives. The audience was completely silent now, drawn into Amanda's story not by entertainment value, but by the terrifying reality of what millions of women face when the system designed to protect them fails. Every day I wonder if it was enough. Amanda continued, if we're really safe, if he'll ever stop looking for us. My children have learned to live as different people, to never talk about their old lives, to always be ready to disappear again, if we have to. She looked at Sophie, Jake, and Emma, who were listening with the serious attention of children who understood that their safety depended on their mother's careful choices. People think leaving an abusive relationship is simple, Amanda said, but when someone has threatened to kill you and your children, when they have the resources to track you down anywhere you go, leaving means giving up everything, your identity, your family, your entire history, to save your children's lives. Steve Harvey, who had made America laugh for decades, who had heard every conceivable story the human heart could tell, found himself facing something that challenged every assumption he had about safety, about protection, about what it meant to be a mother, willing to sacrifice everything for her children's survival. Amanda, Steve said, his voice thick with emotion and genuine fear for her safety. What you just shared takes incredible courage, but I'm worried about you. Are you safe? Are your children safe? Amanda managed a small smile, despite her tears. We're safer than we've ever been, Mr. Harvey. It took 3 years, but we've built a life where we don't have to be afraid every day. My children are happy, healthy, and learning what it means to live without fear. She paused, looking around the studio. But I wanted to share our story because there are thousands of women watching who think they have no options, who think they have to stay because leaving seems impossible. I want them to know that there are people who will help them disappear, if that's what it takes to stay alive. Steve felt a profound mix of admiration and protectiveness toward this woman who had shared something so dangerous, so personal in hopes of helping others. Amanda, he said, what you've done, protecting your children by giving up your own identity, that's not just brave, that's heroic. You literally saved your children's lives by being willing to stop being who you were. He turned to address the entire studio, his voice carrying an authority that transcended entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, Amanda Clark just shared something that most people will never have to face. She showed us what it looks like when a mother's love requires the ultimate sacrifice, giving up your own identity to save your children's lives. Steve turned back to Amanda, his expression showing both the profound respect he felt for her courage and genuine concern for her continued safety. Amanda, I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. What you've done is extraordinary, and you deserve support, recognition, and most importantly, continued safety for you and your children. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card. This has my phone number on it, he said, handing it to Amanda. Not just because I want to help, but because heroes like you shouldn't have to fight alone. But Steve wasn't finished. He addressed the cameras directly, his voice carrying both urgency and determination. "I want everyone watching this to understand something," he said. "Domestic violence doesn't just happen to other people. It happens to women in every community, every economic class, every background, and sometimes the only way to survive is to disappear completely." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this and you're in danger, know that there are people who will help you escape safely. There are resources, advocates, and programs designed to help you and your children start over with new identities, if that's what it takes to save your lives." The audience response was immediate and overwhelming, but it wasn't the typical game show applause. It was recognition of courage beyond imagination, acknowledgement of sacrifice that most people couldn't fathom, and commitment to supporting someone who had risked everything to share her truth. Amanda, overwhelmed by the support and understanding she had never dared to hope for, broke down completely. Sophie, Jake, and Emma immediately moved to comfort their mother, creating a circle of love that proved that family bonds transcend names, identities, or any external circumstances. The episode that aired 8 weeks later became one of the most watched and most discussed in Family Feud history, not because of the game, but because viewers witnessed something that forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth about domestic violence and the lengths some women must go to protect their children. But the real impact happened in the weeks and months that followed. Amanda's story sparked a national conversation about domestic violence, about the failures of legal protection systems, and about the underground networks that help women and children escape when conventional resources aren't enough. Steve established the Amanda Clark Safe Families Foundation, providing resources and funding for organizations that help domestic violence victims create new identities when necessary for their survival. The foundation works with legal advocates, safe house networks, and relocation specialists to ensure that no woman has to choose between staying with an abuser and losing her children. 6 months after the taping, Amanda received word through her advocates that David had been arrested on charges related to threatening his new girlfriend. While this didn't guarantee her permanent safety, it provided some relief and validation that her decision to disappear had been necessary and correct. Amanda continued her work, helping other domestic violence survivors, always maintaining the careful anonymity that kept her family safe. She became an advocate for legal reforms that would make it easier for abuse victims to relocate safely with their children, and for better training for law enforcement and court systems in recognizing the sophisticated tactics of abusers. Her children, now 13, 11, and 9, had adapted completely to their new identities, while maintaining the resilience and closeness that their shared experience had created. They understood now why they had needed new names, why they had moved so far away, why their mother had made the choices she made, and they were proud of her courage. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every conversation about family, safety, and what it means to protect those you love. He learned that sometimes the greatest act of love requires the greatest sacrifice. That courage doesn't always look like fighting, but sometimes looks like running, and that a mother's protection of her children can require giving up everything, including herself. Amanda's story became more than just a television moment. It became a reminder that domestic violence is not a private family matter, but a public safety crisis, that the system designed to protect victims often fails them, and that sometimes survival requires resources and strategies that exist outside conventional legal protections. Because sometimes a mother's confession about changing her identity can teach an entire studio about the hidden reality of domestic violence. Sometimes the most powerful stories are about disappearing rather than appearing, and sometimes the most important television happens when someone risks their safety to share a truth that could save other people's lives. Amanda Clark, whatever her real name might be, showed the world that when a mother's love meets a father's violence, love can win, but only if it's willing to pay the ultimate price. Everything the mother used to be transformed into everything her children need her to become, to keep them safe. And that transformation, born of terror but sustained by love, may be the most heroic thing any person can do.